Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Daniel Medina and we're going to get started. For those of you who don't know, I've been with the Investors Advantage since 2006. Company's been around since 1979, I believe, so just over 40 years. We are located in Westlake Village and we're going to start today by just going over our website and making sure you know we post all of our webinars on our webinar page. We post the recording to the webinar that we do on Wednesday over the weekend, and we send it out. So if you haven't seen the other ones, please make sure you take a look and see everything that we're doing. We also post John's interviews, and he was on Yahoo Finance, I believe, twice in the last week. So make sure you check those out. We're streaming live on Facebook. So please invite your friends and family to check us out and see what we're doing. We're also part of a larger group called Elite Financial Network that manages about $800 million. And here comes John.
Thanks, Daniel. So glad you folks could join us. We appreciate your showing up here. We will do everything we can to show up here. And of course, life has its way of throwing some surprises in the equation, right? So I like to say, let's keep our sense of humor, and that way we can figure out how to get along. And I think Joan Rivers said it magnificently. If you can laugh at it, you can deal with it. So let's figure out what we can laugh at and find more things to laugh at. And then we can get just enough distance to go back and go, okay, let's see what I can do about this. So let's talk about the market a little bit and give you our assessment as to what we're seeing. And it's quite different than what you're seeing every day in the media. And one of the interviews that Daniel alluded to, I was on, where there's been over 165,000 viewers. So it's really nice to be able to say some things, as I say, that we think are different than what you typically hear, and the response be as favorable as it has been. On that note, and speaking of, things kind of going awry with this COVID-19, just upsetting every apple cart we can imagine, we announced last week that we are now doing full financial plans for everyone who is a frontline worker. So that's our way of giving back. It's one of our ways. There's some other things we do too, like help nonprofits host poker tournaments when we can. But right now we're looking at the folks who are on the front line, and they're putting everything on the line to make sure that we're as safe as we possibly can be. And I so appreciate that Daniel and I looked at each other and say, maybe there's a way we could say sincerely thank you. And for example, when we looked last year in Seattle, when we were at a conference, and this was just last year, we found that the average cost for doing a financial plan, when people bothered to do it, the planners charge typically $2,000. So we will spend up to 90 minutes with an individual or couple to help them see how much money do you need behind door number one when you want to make work optional. And then what happens in the event one of the breadwinners weren't around tomorrow financially, what does the survivor need to keep things afloat? And we'll be talking about various forms of insurance we have, and we'll go again, we are today. And then in this case, it's a couple, Daniel I was just working with yesterday, where she's a frontline worker in the medical field, where they have 3 children. They're spread out quite nicely, 8, 10, and 15, and they have some goals that they want to achieve relative to their education for the children. So it's all a financial question. And this is why we like helping people frame the question and then answer it so that they can see we're in good shape. We can weather this storm. We don't have to, hope to die because something has changed so adversely that we don't want to stick around. All right, so let me bring you up to date as far as the market is concerned. And we're looking at it from January 1 through today. What's interesting, it was a pretty good day in the market. It looks like Wall Street liked what, there are really no changes from Jerome Powell. None were expected. And typically, the market doesn't like surprises. So this seemed to be pretty well received, along with the hope for a vaccine, hopefully, but let's say by 2021, maybe by the end of the year. Maybe, to me, that's a big maybe. But that hope does seem to percolate as far as the market's concerned. Year to date, the Dow's up. The Dow is off 7%, despite this huge gain that the media is very excited about. The S&P is up just almost 1%, 0.86%. That's roughly 86 basis points. That's exactly what it is. And the Nasdaq has remained in positive territory, about 17.5%. So we're going to look at it from our perspective, because see, as long as there's a melt up, we all think happy days are here again, and we smoke whatever we smoke, and we drink the Kool-Aid and wear our rose-colored glasses. But it's when things turn upside down, the Humpty Dumpty falls, and you never can put Humpty Dumpty back together again. That's when it gets scary, and that's when people really get unnerved. And certainly it's difficult for them to have a nice day, let alone a nice life. So we think there very well could be a bear market in the equation, and we think it could be happening right now. Just to kind of give you an overview, we'll give you the details. And then we're going to get into, like I say, the two primary questions are, how much money are you going to need if you live too long, to age 100, longer than you imagine, but you can't get a job as a Walmart greeter at 82. So we need to have the money last as long as you do. That's number one. And then number two is what happens in the event of a loss. And the beautiful thing about insurance is that's what the insurance companies are in business for, to take the loss off of you and pass it on to the insurance, and they bear the brunt of those expenses as opposed to you bearing it 100%. And we're working with Patrick McMahon today he's up on this call, to look at specifically long-term care. Let's understand it. Let's see how it works. Let's recognize there's no plan that's perfect, and yet there are some very good plans. And as I say, when we work with our clients, we want them to see, is there some part of, in the event you need long-term care, that you either want to bear 100% or pass off some percentage to the insurance company, and that way, you don't run through a whole bunch of money. And just understand, some studies suggest that people in their last 2, 3, 4 years of life can easily run through $250,000 of their own cash. And then, of course, if there's another loved one in the equation, geez, you took a lot with you, and I'm glad you did, but now there's less left for me, whoever the survivor might be. That's often the reality. And then we'll get into your questions and answers, and we really appreciate the questions that you pose. So let's get down to brass tacks. Yes, is there a bear market on the horizon? And here's what we think we can look at that says very, very highly possible. What we're seeing here, we like the charts because it helps see the picture more than people can understand the word. So here's what we're seeing here. You can see at the heading, Nasdaq finally breaks above the top trend line. Now, this is something that really, the last top was about September 18th of about 81.33 until July 10th, and then it peaked again on July 13th. Now, this is a logarithmic scale, so it's an easy way to take a lot of data and put it in one format so that our minds can kind of accept it. So the log chart turns on an exponential trend, the more of a straight line, so that we linear thinking humans can relate to it better. And then, charts are useful even for the shorter trends of just a decade. So that's what we're seeing. That we may very well be at that trend line. We're thinking it's between 10,300 and 11,000 the Nasdaq. We're right about 10.5 right now. It may bounce along here. And look, one thing to consider that you can completely comprehend, as the Dow, that was the only stock market back in the Great Depression, was dropping like a rock, 80% in 30 months, which is by itself hard to fathom. There was about a 50% bounce in the equation for about 6 months, which often leads people to go, well, it's off to the races again. Only that was in the middle, so it was a 50% gain. And we think that was absolutely the evidence of a bear market trap. And sure enough, it turned around upside down and upset everything. And remember, it took maybe 20, 25 years for that market to get back, the Dow to get back to even, assuming you didn't take any money out of the account, out of your stocks, and that you didn't, you didn't add to your position, you didn't spend any money. You held the same positions that just were down 80, 89%, and it took 25 years to get back to even. That'd be a hard way to go. I mean, let's see how many people are going to wait without spending a dime for 25 years for it to get back to even. I dare say no one would be doing that. So now let's look at the next chart that we look at. This is what's called a throwover. This is a linear chart, and it's a top trend line drawn through September 18th and back to the February tops. All right, it looks like we had the top around the 19th or 20th of February, and then by March 23rd, roughly just a little over a month, you saw a 35% decline. The math is very simple. If the loss is 20%, you need 25. If the loss is 30%, now we need 50. Just stop there, because the way we think, right, is if I'm off 30, I need 30. No, the hole has gotten bigger. You need 50 to offset 30 effectively and completely. But if you only go up to the loss of from 30 to 40, 10 points, now you need 50 at 30, and at 40 it's over 66 is what you need. At 50 it's 100. So see what happens? That hole just keeps getting bigger and deeper, and so it's hard to really recover. So this looks at something we call a negative reversal day. Now these occur when the market makes an all new high and then reverses and closes below the low of that rally. So this is what we're really looking at. We're going to break through to the upside. That would be very good news. Or is it more likely to the downside? And when we look at the markets every day, it's hard to see the trends. And that's not the kind of work that typically the media does. So it's really hard to see the forest for the trees. And for us, we want to get a better perspective by distinguishing the forest from the trees to see, are these gains holding? If, for example, do we see a lot of volume in the market or less volume? Right now, we're not seeing a lot of volume. We would submit to you that that's not a good sign. And as we've talked about the last couple of weeks, what we do see is the giant five, the FANG stocks, right? The Alphabets, the Googles, the Microsoft, the stocks that are really ratcheting up to the new highs, certainly taking Nasdaq with it, and maybe a good part of the S&P as well, is disproportionate. So when you look at the S&P 500, we want all the stocks to be moving in an upward fashion, not 10 or 20 or 5, because as I say, that volume isn't there. The correct word is breadth. That's with a D, breadth. When we have a lack of breadth, then that's not a good sign. And we have been here, what looks to me like a redo of 2000, where we saw exactly the same thing, different number of stocks, but it was the top 5 that took off. And then lo and behold, how low can we go with an 80% decline? Now, the next one I think maybe makes a little more sense. And this is to look at the zombie companies, okay? These are the companies that have, you can see, and the numbers have exploded. And and these are inevitable bankruptcies. And these are defaults that show up in an already over-indebted economy. And as you may recall, that's been one of our concerns for well over a year, that the consumer, corporations, and governments have all taken on massive amounts of debt. Like we want to live like the Kardashians, only they tend to have great cash flow. I don't know what their debt level is. All I'm trying to say is there's so many examples of companies who have taken on more debt than they can bear. And we are very concerned about what we think will be a wave of bankruptcies. This COVID-19 is revealing a lot of the cracks in the system, and things are not as strong as they might appear. So zombie companies are those that are still operating but cannot pay their debt service. You know, as a consumer, if you have a first, second, and third of the house and you miss 1 or 2 payments, well, that means this house of cards is probably coming down. So the companies, belong in bankruptcy. That's what bankruptcy is for. But the lavish quantitative easing, the money supply, the stimulus packages that the Fed has been all about helps them limp along. But at some point, the music stops on the carousel and everybody has to get out. And speaking of everybody, this is not very polite terminology, but some people looking at what the smart money is doing in this slide versus what has been called the dumb money, and it's derisive. We understand that, but what we're seeing is a lot of the institutions, a lot of the endowments, a lot of the larger accounts have moved to cash in an increasing portion over the last 4 months, as this market seems to be inching further north. So we see that we had a speculative surge into the 18th of January. And that's when we saw the first, what we call bubble peak, from 1.4 million to 4.2 million contracts. These are folks who have gotten in late in the game, maybe around the end of March or so, with their PPP money or their tax return money. And now they are moving very dramatically in a very large number, like 3 million contracts we can see between 2 primary trading companies, all right? So, and many of these investors are brand new, have no history, do not imagine any kind of loss, but they've exacerbated this story by taking on debt because so many people feel like it's fear of missing out. Why? Greed is good. All this money is being made and I don't want to be left on the sidelines. So let me take it and try to make as much money as I possibly can. So we're seeing that, we're advancing from 5.5 million as far as the number of contracts, up from 4.2 and getting to 9.7 million. And we don't see that ending anytime soon, but it does come to an end when things turn awry and people can see, I had no idea I could lose that much money, and then they figure out the pain. So, and a lot of this is with call options. So the smart selling, smart money, as you can see in this one, with debt research, you can see that they have been moving out of shares as opposed to accumulating shares over the last 4 months, into March into the March tech top. And they bought into the crash late March and recently have been selling for the last 4 months as the rally has been occurring for the smaller investors. Many of them are saying, enough already. There's just so many uncertainties in the equation. And we would agree. So think of it this way. The smart money or the larger accounts often use sophisticated tools and their wisdom, which the smart money is hard to employ. So what some would consider the really rich money watches the dumb money, the small accounts, and they do the opposite. They're whales feeding on minnows, is the way one person put it. So they can scare you into and out of your position so that they make most of the money, and they come in and out of the equations massively, and also decide when and when not to use leverage. So we see that too many investors are almost end up feeling like they got in near the end of the bottom or out near the bottom. That isn't a good feeling. So what Harry says, Harry Dent, head of our research team, what he says about those opening up an E-Trade account, don't do it. Just donate the money to charity and get a full tax deduction now. Harry does have a sense of humor, but I think you can understand his point. All right, so what we're saying, just as in conclusion, we all want to enjoy the melt up, but where we put our emphasis is limiting the declines. And most folks don't do that, so they fully participate in the declines. And again, do the math, not the math to the upside, that's the good news. It's the math to the downside that you have to really take into account. Again, you're off 20, you need 25. You're off 30, now you need 50. You're off 40, now you need like 66 and a half. At 50% loss, now you need 100% gain. All I'm trying to say is, where do you want to play? Do you want to hope and pray for a Hail Mary pass just to get back to even? Or do you want to say, let's like when we learned in karate, right? Let's learn how to fall, not how to flip the other guy, how to fall, so that we can play the game. We can play again. So that's what we're suggesting. This is the work that we like to do, and feel free to contact us, as we would like to do this work for you as well. All right. So let's turn to the whole question of long-term care. And Patrick McMahon, I want you to take it from here, if you would, please. I see that there's a couple of things I need to come back to, and then I'll come back here. But I want you to talk about long-term care, both in terms of what it does, how it works, and the whole notion of, do you have to buy all of it? Can you buy a piece of it in terms of the coverage that you're trying to take care of? And do you have, is it the case, as it has been in the past, that if you don't use the money's gone effectively? If you don't use the money in a long-term care policy, it's completely lost. So cover those issues, please, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. Patrick McMahon.
Perfect.
Yes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Patrick, or if you can just call me Pat McMahon. I appreciate the introduction there, John. I work for a company called Exclusive Insurance Brokerage, but I think it's not really appropriate for what I do, because in reality, I work for guys like John and Daniel here as a insurance consultant. Life insurance, long-term care is my specialty. I would say more than a product provider, I'm a solution provider. I do not work for any particular insurance companies. My job is to find the right solution for all of you. That's based on your health, based on your budget, based on what your goals for your future are. not what any one particular insurance company can provide for you. So hopefully that makes sense, that we're coming from this from an agnostic or unbiased standpoint, really just here to educate you guys a little bit about how this all works and hopefully shed a little bit of light on a topic that can be scary for quite a few folks here. So with that, Daniel, let's continue on and let's talk about who actually needs long-term care. Currently, if you are 65 years old today, there is a 70% chance that you're going to require some form of long-term care, which really tells us 30 people out of 100 will not need it. So perhaps the most concerning stat of all, though, is that out of all of those folks, only 10% actually have any kind of protection in place. So we're going to have 70 folks who need long-term care. 7 of them are actually going to have some coverage in place, which means out of every 65-year-old, out of every 100 65-year-olds that we have today, we're going to have about 63 of them who need long-term care and have nothing in place to pay for it. I want to continue on here, Daniel. So if we look at this snapshot, actually, I think we continue to the next one here, Daniel. That was that one right there. Perfect. So if we look at the snapshot here of 100 people, we assume that 70 will need care. We can see that the likelihood of a couple needing care is even higher. So as you can see here, about 4 or 5 couples, or 9% of folks, will not need any care whatsoever. About 20 or 21, 42% of these couples, we're going to have a situation where one person needs care. And out of 25 of these couples here, we're going to be in a scenario where both people need care. It's 49% of the time. So when we look at those numbers in total, we can see that for every couple, there's a 91% chance that at least one person is going to need care. The risk is very, very real. So let's take a moment to talk about how much this care can actually cost. These averages here are going to pop up for California. I do think it's safe to say that an area like Westlake, or I'm sure you guys are nearby here in California, it's probably going to be a little bit higher than these state averages, but these are what California is at right now. These are 2019 numbers based off of a survey from last year. The future numbers here, 2029 and 2039, are simply based off of 3% inflation. Now, those numbers may not come to fruition, but it's the best guess that we can make at this point of where we're going to end up. Now, as you can see, care is certainly not cheap. We start looking at those nursing home numbers. I can't imagine coming out of pocket $15,000 or $19,000 a month to pay for care. But in my opinion, it seems like what most people would actually prefer to do is to be able to stay in their own homes. People don't really want to move out, go to a nursing home and be taken care of by a bunch of people they don't know. They would much prefer to stay at home. So for my money, I think focusing on these home care numbers is a little bit more appropriate for the amount of care that we want to provide for and sort of the cost that we want to be prepared to withhold or to deal with here in the future. So most people will need care for only 1 to 4 years. The average is right about 3 years, but we have to remember that if the average is about 3 years, that means that every person who needed care for a couple months or just 1 year, somebody else who needed it for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years plus, or even 10 years of care. And perhaps the biggest risk of all is not even the physical ailments, it's the mental ones. Diagnosis of Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, they can carry a life expectancy of 10 years or even more. And so what I like to ask people is, if they had to come up with $8,000 a month per person per month for 10 years to pay for long-term care, that's $960,000. How are you going to be able to do it? Now, granted, this is a more extreme example, and most people will not have to come out of pocket this much money, but it certainly is a situation that can occur. And before we scare you too much here about how we're going to do it, we're going to talk a little bit more about my family story and kind of what, I guess, intrigues me about long-term care and why I feel such a passion to help people with it. So these are my grandparents here. May they both rest in peace. Robert Leonard Williams and Betty Joanne Brown. They were married September 17th, 1950, less than 9 months after meeting at an officer's ball. There's me, a little chubby baby there for you. One thing about my grandparents is they both love kids. They had 2 of their own. They adopted 3 more, and they were foster parents to many, many others. And through their 60s and 70s, life was pretty good. My grandfather worked with his son, my uncle, as well as my father as an attorney in their practice, and that continued for many years. But here, as you can see, in December of 2002 is when things started to change. My grandfather had his first stroke. It landed him in a skilled nursing facility for 3 months until he's finally able to return home. Hold on just 1 second here, Daniel. So my grandfather was never able to recover. He had a second stroke just after his 80th birthday, I believe. He was permanently bedridden and he lost the ability to speak. If it weren't for his ability to still communicate with his left hand through squeezes, honestly, we wouldn't have even been sure if he was still completely there mentally. The previous photo had a picture of us all there together on Easter. That was one of the only times that we were able to get him out of the house, and it took an entire group of people just to get him out of the house. This picture here was the last time I saw my grandfather in 2008. You can see that firm left-hand grip that we had, which is what, again, all he had control over. You can go ahead and continue on here, Daniel. My grandmother's story is not as heartbreaking, but she did need extensive care nonetheless. About 1 year after my grandfather passed away, she was diagnosed with Parkinson's and Meniere's disease, needed assistance for 8 hours a day. 2011, she fell and broke her hip and would never recover. So she required 24/7 home care until she passed away into April of 2015. So from personal experience here, I can tell you guys that needing a combined 12 years of care is certainly not out of the question. It is exactly what happened to my grandparents. So one of the many reasons why I really feel strongly about what I do here and wanting to protect people from this outcome. And I don't want this to be a sad day here either. And luckily, my grandparents were some of the lucky ones. They had done pretty well for themselves in real estate. My grandfather served in World War II. And so because of that Navy service, he had a lot of his care paid for, but most people can't rely on that. So now what I want to do with you guys here today is I want to talk to you about the solutions, how we can make sure that your loved ones don't have to absorb what could be a really large financial burden here for you. So the way that most people think about long-term care is the traditional standalone method of doing it. I think you can go ahead and continue on here. There are three ways that we do it. There's traditional long-term care, there's life insurance with long-term care rider, and there's what we call a hybrid or asset-based long-term care solution. We will spend a little bit of time going into each one a little bit more depth here in a moment. We're going to start with the traditional side here though. This is what most people think of when they hear long-term care. It's a type of product where you pay a premium. If you need care, they're going to give you some money. But if you don't need the care, you get nothing for it. And perhaps the biggest concern of all, and you guys may have had friends or family members who've experienced this, is the non-guaranteed premiums and the significant history of rate increases. There have been a lot of problems with this. I could get into more detail later, Daniel or John, if you'd like me to, about exactly what happened and why. But the long story short is that carriers grossly mispriced these types of products back in the day. Sometimes they were unable to increase rates due to the parameters of the contract. In other words, people had guaranteed benefits. They had 10 years of payments and then they were done contractually. Those created big losses for the carriers. And so what you end up with today are a lot of these insurance companies essentially passing on those mistakes of the past onto consumers today. That's not to say that traditional does not have its place, but they are rarely chosen as the sort of ideal option for folks these days, the majority of the time. And really the issues with these being, again, the main issues being the non-guaranteed premiums, the use it or lose it nature of the product, and the fact that rate increases, I guess the way to put it would be, it's not a question of if it will occur, it's a question of when and how much it will be, have really led us to a new world of products, a couple new types of products out there that can really remove those problems that we had before. So you guys have probably heard about life insurance. You know that when you pass away, it pays a benefit to your loved ones. But did you know that your life insurance can work for you while you are still alive? So what we would do here essentially is by using a permanent life insurance contract and adding on what they call a rider. It's just a feature on the contract that provides for either long-term care or chronic illness. We now create a scenario where we get guaranteed leverage on your money. You may need your policy for long-term care. You may not. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. But regardless of what happens in your lifetime, the total benefit pool that is provided for you and your family will always be more than you paid into the contract. It will always be paid out in one fashion or another. And the benefits, whether they're death benefit or long-term care, are always going to be tax-free. So there's a large advantage in that situation over simply self-insuring against long-term care. So here's the high-level view of how this type of products work. And we will in just a moment go into a little bit more detail on exactly how that occurs. Now, relative to traditional long-term care, it is a higher cost product. However, it also provides a lot more guaranteed value. It provides the strongest death benefit leverage out of all of the products out there. In other words, you're buying a bucket of money that provides death benefit. If you need it, you have it for care. If you don't, it pays out just like any regular insurance policy would. So essentially what we're doing here is we're killing two birds with one stone. We're protecting you against an unexpected passing, which is why you would need life insurance to begin with, but we're also covering against that unexpected illness that may occur along the lifetime. These products can be fully guaranteed. There's a number of products out there that some operate on market performance, some are fully guaranteed. everything in between, which we don't need to bore you with the minutia here today, but we can get products where your premiums and the number of years you pay for it is completely 100% guaranteed. I put a note in here that it requires average or better health. Technically, that is not true. You could, in theory, get a policy like this, even if you were below average health. However, from a pricing standpoint, I don't think it's the most efficient solution for someone who is below average health. And we'll explain that why in a moment, but the simple answer to that is this type of product is what they call fully underwritten. They're going to assess your health and they're going to give you an offer based on it. The healthier you are, the cheaper your premiums will be, which is why being an average or better health is an advantage for you. Whereas some of the other types of products, which we'll get to here in a moment, are what they call pass or fail products. So as long as you get that thumbs up green light and they're willing to insure you, it does not matter whatsoever what your medical history was, you're going to get the same exact rate as the guy who runs triathlons who lives down the street from you. And I mentioned here, it's the ideal alternative to self-insuring against long-term care. I kind of touched on that here a moment ago, but what I mean by that is if you are the type of consumer who has the assets to pay for long-term care out of pocket, if you had to, why not take a portion of those assets, leverage them up with a tax-free death benefit that can be used for long-term care? If you do not need it, those assets will pass to your beneficiaries tax-free, resulting in more assets being given to your children. And if you do need it, you're now paying pennies on the dollar for long-term care, again, resulting in more assets being transferred to generations. So I want to give you an example here of how this works. We're talking about George here. George is 56 years old. He's in average health. He's retired in about 10 to 12 years. He has 2 kids in college, 15 years left in the mortgage. And so he needs 2 things here. He needs short-term death benefit protection for his family to get those kids through college, to get that mortgage paid off. And he also needs long-term care. So option 1 is a one-time premium. What George does is he takes $150,000 he had from a money market account and he decides to use that for his life insurance solution. He buys a guaranteed death benefit of $434,112. He'll be able to access 2% of that number every month for long-term care if he needs it, which comes out to $8,682 a month. Now keep in mind, these are arbitrary numbers just based on this particular individual. There is no set rule that says you need to put up 150 or 100 or 50 or any particular number. This is simply an example. But to tie this together here, as we mentioned before, anything that he does not use for care is going to pay to his family. So if he uses 134 out of that $434,000 for long-term care and then he passes away, his family is still getting $300,000. So no matter how we slice it, we're getting leverage on that money. Whether it's 36 cents on the dollar for long-term care or nearly 3-to-1 tax-free death benefit leverage, we know that that care is going to be paid out. Now, assuming a 30% tax bracket, because again, we have to remember, if we were to make alternative investments and self-insure, we have to pay taxes on all of that gain. So assuming that tax bracket at 30%, George would have to have that $150,000 grow from his money market up to $555,000 before he passed away to provide an equivalent benefit to the family. That is not to say that's an impossibility. There may be situations where the markets do perform that well, but what we're here to do is eliminate that risk. Eliminate the risk of him dying young. Eliminate the risk of him needing LTC in his 50s or early 60s. Eliminate the need for the markets to perform in order for you to provide for your family what you wanted to provide. This is a way to get it done on a guaranteed basis. Now, a second option for George here, because not everybody has $150,000 just sitting around ready to be used, is paying for this annually. So we can get the same exact benefits for George, the same benefit of $434, the same $8,600 a month for long-term care, the same situation where if he doesn't spend it all, his family gets the rest. The difference is instead of putting up $150 all at once, he's instead going to pay just over $7,000 per year. Again, the policy is fully guaranteed. These premiums will be paid until he passes away or until he makes an LTC claim, at which point those premiums would be waived. So let's assume he gets out to age 80 and then begins to make an LTC claim at that point. His total cost at that point would be $168,000, a little bit more than the $150 his other option was. But you can see from the standpoint of turning $168 into $434 tax-free, the leverage is still on his side quite significantly there. And just as a quick aside here, there are options that would allow you to pay for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or up to any particular age that you see fit to fit whatever your goals are. These are simply examples to provide sort of the shortest way and the longest way to pay for it. We can always end up somewhere in the middle. Now, I want to talk for a second about the third way that we can solve this, the asset-based long-term care solution. Now, not everybody is young enough and healthy enough or has the assets around to pay for a life insurance contract with that LTC rider, or at least for it to make sense. But we do have a number of what we call those asset-based long-term care solutions available to provide more affordable LTC coverage with more liberal underwriting. So unlike the life insurance with the long-term care feature that we just talked about a moment ago, these types of products provide us with a defined bucket of money that can be used. However, the death benefit is going to be a lot lower, with the LTC benefit being much higher. So in other words, if simply having affordability and protection in place and making sure that you don't burn through your assets to pay for LTC is your main concern, this very, very well could be the right option for you. We'll probably touch on this here later, but essentially with a situation like this, if you do not need LTC, you're going to get what you paid in the contract plus a little bit on top. You're going to lose a little bit of opportunity cost perhaps, but your money itself is going to be returned to you with a little bit of leverage on it as well. But if you need the long-term care, for the price that you paid for it, you're going to get significantly more LTC benefits in place for that price than you would have purchasing the type of solution we just talked about a moment ago. I think these types of plans are really ideal for people, again, who just want affordability and protection. They're not as concerned about giving money to generation two or providing guaranteed leverage on their money, or single individuals who, again, are really just making sure that they have a way to pay for care themselves rather than, making sure, or rather than having to have a family member come take care of them if they had, sort of an unexpected event here. These are the types of products that usually fit best for those types of folks. We can go ahead and continue on here, Daniel. So these are relative to the type of solution that we just talked about. It is a low-cost solution. There are also joint products available, meaning we can get a husband and wife or two partners onto one product together, no problem. Very often, these policies are all fully guaranteed. There's a couple scenarios in which it's not, but by and large, this type of solution has fully guaranteed benefits and rates. So whatever you sign up for, you're going to get it. Like I mentioned before, it has a death benefit there to prevent that use it or lose it problem. It is also a pass-fail type underwriting situation. So if you've got a couple impairments, a little bit overweight, take high blood pressure medication, things of that nature, this could be a really nice solution that you're not having to pay extra money for those impairments. And here's the big one, in my opinion, is actually what my personal parents were really excited about after what we went through with my grandparents, is there are even products out there that can provide you with unlimited lifetime benefits. And when I say unlimited, I don't mean you get infinite money, but whatever benefit amount you pay for, whether it's $5,000, $7,000, or $10,000 a month, that particular benefit amount is available to you and your spouse forever, no matter what, no questions asked. Even if it's 10, 15 years consecutively, those benefits will continue to pay out. So how exactly does this work? And we kind of touched on this here already, but we're going to just go over this here in a little bit more detail. So the client is going to pay premiums. That is going to give us a small death benefit that's there to prevent that loss of principal if the long-term care is not needed. So during that long-term care claim, what happens here is that death benefit is spent down dollar for dollar until it reaches nothing. So if you put in $100,000 with a death benefit of $150,000, as you begin to take LTC out, same situation before is going to apply. You use $100,000 and you pass away, the remaining $50,000 is going to pay out to the beneficiaries. But the real value that is provided in these contracts is once your death benefit has been completely spent, there are features on the contracts that extend those long-term care benefits after that death benefit hits zero. So even though there's no more death benefit and you passing away would not pay anything out, you're continuing to collect long-term care benefits, which again is why it's a more robust LTC solution for the cost, but a less robust death benefit solution for the same price. Effectively, what we can do here is put a cap on our total long-term care expenses, because after that death benefit is spent, again, we can continue to collect LTC at the insurance carrier's expense. Here is an example of how that works. So we've got a couple this time, Robert and Diane. They are both 65 years old, and their concern is that long-term care expenses might ruin their retirement plans. They've done pretty well, they've saved assets pretty well, but $8,000 a month, 4, 5, 6 years could really present a very, very large problem for them. And they've got a little bit of medical history there as well that we were concerned about. They have set aside $100,000 a piece to address this problem. So for this total of $200,000 that they're putting into this, this is for both of them on one contract. They're going to have a death benefit of $215,000. And this is, again, just to prevent that loss of principal, because realistically, that is not very strong leverage on your money, of course. But again, we're in the business of shifting or mitigating risk. The risk of extensive long-term care versus the opportunity cost is what we have to weigh here. So you don't need the death benefit, or excuse me, you don't need the LTC. The 215 is going to pay out as a death benefit. But here's the real value of this contract. They're both going to have almost $6,500 a month for long-term care. That's going to be for their entire lives. It is unlimited. It is lifetime. So no matter what happens, their maximum total cost is $200,000. Their minimum total benefit is $215,000. But like I said before, the key here is that almost $6,500 a month per person per month forever, fully guaranteed. Had my grandparents had a policy like this, designed the exact same way with the same monthly benefit, over that 12-year period where they needed care, they would have taken out over $930,000 for LTC benefits. We're talking more than 4-to-1 leverage on their money, less than 25 cents in the dollar for long-term care had they had something like this in place. Obviously, it would have been a great buy for them. Ship has already sailed for them, but not for everybody else. Now, there's another type of hybrid LTC solution available. And we looked at one just a moment ago where that benefit of about $6,500 was the same every month. It was level, it never changed. But there are some folks out there, particularly individuals, who may not need care for 15, 20, or 30 years plus. They want to make sure that they're protected. And so there are some affordable long-term care solutions out there for them that will grow over time as the price of long-term care rises. They can also offer us 100% liquidity. So that's not necessarily to say that every product will offer that or it's the best solution for you in particular. But for individuals who are concerned about liquid assets or potentially wanting to get out of these types of contracts and get their money back, we can absolutely deliver that. You can surrender the contract and get all of your money back at any time. Every dollar paid back in the policy will go back to you then. So let's talk about Barbara here. Barbara is only 50 years old and her husband is in declining health. She has adult children, but her main concerns is the affordability of a long-term care solution and being able to stay at home and have someone come take care of her. She'll be able to take care of her husband as he ages and sort of goes downhill, so to speak, but who is going to be there to take care of her? She certainly does not want to burden her children with having to take care of her, and she also doesn't want to have to move into a nursing home. So Barbara feels like she's going to need care about age 80. Certainly it could be later, it could be sooner, but based on her family history, she thinks about 80 years old is when she's going to need care. And based on the cost of care where she lives, she feels comfortable with about a $9,000 benefit per month at that point in time. But $9,000 a month for a 50-year-old right now may be a little bit excessive and not something that we really need. So what we're going to do instead is get a product where the benefits grow over time. So Barbara purchases this policy for a single premium of $83,000. And just one thing I want to mention here, I've given a few examples of these single premium options. By and large, we can always pay for a minimum of 10 years. There are often situations where we can pay for longer periods of time than that. So if you are the type of individual who thinks that a solution like this may be appropriate based on the value and the type of solution that it is, but you don't have that money to pay for it all at once, you don't need to worry. There are plenty of ways to pay for it. I just don't want to waste everybody's time going through line by line explaining that. So just keep that in mind. But for Barbara here, the example, she's going to put up $83,000 as her single premium. That's going to provide her with a minimum death benefit of $120,000 to prevent that loss of principal. I say minimum because the way the product works, there are points in time where the death benefit is higher. It'll eventually hit $120,000 and level off, but it'll always be at least that much. So we're getting basically 50% leverage on our money from 83 to 120 as our worst case scenario. At any time she wants, if she wants to surrender this policy, she can do it. She'll get her full $83,000 back, no questions asked. The benefits are structured to grow to $9,350 per month by the time she reaches age 80, and she's going to have a total of 6 years of coverage. So we're looking at over $100,000 per year by age 80 in LTC benefits and a 6-year benefit period. So for her $83,000, by the time she's 80 years old, she's going to have more than $600,000 of long-term care access. If she does not need the care, her beneficiary will get $120,000. And if for whatever reason she decides at any point she doesn't want this any longer, she's going to be able to get all of her money back. And you can see here down below on this slide, the various amounts of benefit available to her over time. She'll have $5,000 immediately when she signs up. And by the time she reaches age 80, you'll see it's over $9,300. And if by chance she lives to age 90 or even 100, you'll see that those benefits continue to grow to keep up with that rising cost of care. Now, a few other factors I just wanted to touch on here briefly. Maybe you've got some health concerns. Are you worried that you may not qualify medically? That is certainly an area which I'm very, very comfortable with helping. I have direct access to carrier underwriters. These are the people who essentially assess a case risk and make a determination on what offer they can make to the client. So I have direct access to these folks. And so I can talk to them beforehand about your specific case and determine before we even put an application in, is it worth the time of putting you through exams and additional testing and ordering medical records? Or is this not going to be a situation that's going to work for us? And also keep in mind, I do this anonymously. So they don't know anything about you other than your gender, your age, and your particular medical conditions. They will never even know your name. So there is no privacy concerns on that side. You may have insurance already as well. What if you have existing life insurance? Well, I ask folks all the time, when was the last time you checked to see how this is performing? Usually the answer is never, or I don't remember. So free of charge, I can help assist with a policy review, which essentially will consist of assessing the strength of the contract now, seeing how well it's performing currently based on how it was sold and the projections on where it is heading. Combine that with the LTC solution, that will allow us to make a recommendation based on how a long-term care solution can either work with or potentially replace your existing insurance to get you into a single, more efficient solution and get rid of the underperforming contract that you may already have. If it's doing well, at the very least, you'll be aware that your contract is doing well and get some peace of mind. And will this cost you anything? Absolutely not. You guys are never gonna have to pay for anything other than the insurance itself. The proposals, all of your best options, all of my assessments, all of the work on this side is absolutely free. Again, the only thing you have to pay for is the actual insurance. So now where do we go from here? I know there was a lot of information. If you guys have some questions, I'm going to be happy to answer them here in just a moment. But if you just got 3 things taken away from this conversation here today, this is what I would want them to be. A lot of people are going to need long-term care. 70% of 65-year-olds need the care, and the costs are very high. There are plenty of options out there that can preserve your assets if you don't need care and make sure that you're not in a situation where you've wasted your money. And John, Daniel, and I are here to help. We work with every A-rated insurance company in the country, so we are uniquely positioned to provide you with essentially multiple unbiased solutions and really just help you guys make the right choice. So you don't need to know what type of solution is right for you. You don't even really need to know how much coverage you want or need at this point. You just need to be willing to review your options and help us, or excuse me, and let us help you to make an informed decision. So with that, we can open it up to any questions, any comments, or any concerns from anybody, or Daniel, if John, if you guys have anything you don't think I addressed that you wanted to bring up, this would be a great time to do it.
Thank you very much, Pat. We're going to open up for questions, and I've got a couple questions coming in. For everyone, there's a Q&A button on your menu bar. Please feel free to use that or send me a chat. First question for you, John. Can you explain how the zombie corporations are going to affect the market?
And again, can I explain how?
Zombie corporations or zombie companies are going to affect the overall market.
Well, they're affecting the overall market now, and it's a great question because see, they seem to be okay, but they're just limping along. They're just waiting for another, it doesn't even have to be lightning, just another bad event to turn them upside down. And then, as I say, I'm afraid we're going to see a bunch of bankruptcies. What did I see today? That 73,000 businesses have closed due to COVID. That's an example. 73,000. That's a big number. When's the last time anybody came up with a number like that? That happened in 7 months. I don't think we've ever seen anything like that. And this is just the beginning. So these companies have been, doing okay, paycheck to paycheck, but they're on very thin margins. And just to put it in your own parlance, when you have, like I say, the first, second, and third, and no cash reserves, and understand from a consumer standpoint, There are studies we have found, and this was January of 19, it's a perfect example. January of 19, long before COVID, 40% of Americans are one paycheck away from being destitute. One paycheck. Just goes to show you how many of us, no matter, we can't point fingers, we're all doing it, we have no reserves. And so when things turn awry, I just had a car stop on me on the way back to the office to do this. And what do you do if it's not under warranty? If you have no reserves, that could be it could upend everything. It could upend your happy little Apple cart. So we're very concerned about these companies that have been limping along, and we think there are a lot of them. And at some point, maybe the best way to put it is kind of like Warren Buffett would say about people who are swimming naked. You don't know they're swimming naked until the tide goes out. Then we see who was swimming naked. We're going to see a lot of naked swimmers out there.
Excellent. Next question for you, Pat. Is permanent and term insurance the same?
No. So term insurance is basically what you refer to as a Band-Aid or a stopgap solution. Usually it's going to be for younger folks, not necessarily always young, but people who have a particular need to cover for a duration of time. So if you're in your 30s and you've got a young family and you figure, I'm going to work till I'm 65, my kids are 2 and 4, I want to give them at least 20 years to get into and through college. I'm going to have some term insurance there for the next 20 or 30 years to protect that. But assuming when that's all done, I don't need it any longer, maybe I don't need to go permanent because, again, my need for insurance is finite. Whereas the permanent insurance solution, if it's designed appropriately, is going to be there for your entire life. No matter if you're 20, 30, or 70 years old today, it's designed to work until you're 105, 120 years old, well beyond life expectancy, so that no matter when your passing occurs, the leverage on that money is going to be paid out to generation 2. So essentially, a term product may or may not provide a benefit. It's really just a peace of mind tool that if something happens to you, your family will be taken care of. Whereas a permanent solution will pay out. It's just a question of when, as long as it's designed correctly and doesn't end up lapsing on you because of underpayment or something along those lines.
Let me piggyback on that question because the way we think about it is, in addition to what Patrick's saying, is we help our clients determine, is it a permanent problem or a temporary problem? Example of the couple yesterday where these are front line, she works on the front line and they have no life insurance with 3 children. But we think these are folks that they're making good money, 41 and 39 if I'm not mistaken, and they may want to try and make life option or working optional at either 67 or 70. So the way we look at it is and their goal is $2.2 million if they're trying to make work optional for them. That's their target. They've never seen that before at age 67. So if you take out, let's say, a 30-year policy, that's kind of an overlap because what we're trying to do is get them to be where they will be self-insured. In other words, the insurance is kind of a stopgap, if you will, while we don't have $2 million on the way to accumulating $2 million. But then in the event that something happens to either one of them, financially, they know they have the wherewithal to live as though both were working and making the same money when they turn 67. So if it is the case that we're on track to, as I say, become self-insured, then we think term is in order. If that's not the case, or we've got some other ways of, some of the whole life policies are magnificent at being able to stash a whole lot of cash, then that's probably a permanent policy. So we always want to make sure the folks understand what are you trying to cover, how much, and what type policy works for the question that you have.
Perfect. And one quick thing to add to that, just in case this question was related to the long-term care solutions, sometimes you will find term products that carry what they call accelerated benefits, the terminal or chronic illness solution there. Those are not true long-term care solutions. Those are essentially discounted at the time of use so that if you were to need care, it's because you're almost dead and you're going to get less out of it than you would if you just waited and passed away. So it does not actually provide real leverage to the family on those types of solutions. If you're looking for a true LTC solution, it's going to need to be on a permanent product.
Great point. Guys, question for you again, Patrick. Is there a limit to how much premiums can be increased? And I assume they're talking about the traditional long-term care policies.
That's a good question. Generally, no, but there are requirements for state approval. So these insurance companies can't simply on a whim say, oh, we're going to quadruple your premiums and just deal with it. So they have to get it approved by the states. So in this case, California. With that being said, though, it's not uncommon to see 25, 30, 50% price increases every 5, 7, 10 years. I personally get these all the time. I would say it feels like once a week, I get an email saying, hey, my client's got a long-term care policy from so-and-so. Their premiums are doubling. What can we do? So technically, there is no limit, but in reality, it must be approved by the state. So I would say you're more than likely to see something in the neighborhood of 20 to 40% on average in increases, but I saw an 80% yesterday. So it's certainly, you never really know. That's one of the problems, though, is there is no rhyme or reason, so to speak, about when and why they can do it. They simply ask for what they want and hope the state approves it.
Excellent. This was for you, John. Should we increase tax rates to the early 1900s rate when they were 90%, at least for the billionaires?
That's a great question. Probably so, and I think many of them would sign off on that. I certainly if Mr. Biden becomes president, and let me say it this way: it has nothing to do with what to me, it doesn't have as much to do with what his party might represent as some people think. What we think is the government is not collecting enough taxes. All right, that's just the way it is. So at some point, we would think to balance the budget, which is something we used to try to do, and we've gotten a long way from doing that for a very long time. You have to look at what do you expect your expenses to be, and just like at home, what are my expenses? What's my income? As long as I keep my expenses below my income, I've got a cushion, right? I've got some savings in the equation. It's when it turns upside down that's when it can become very ugly. So I suspect, regardless of who's in office, let's just look at it like this. Yeah, back when Reagan was in office, if the household income was north of $200,000, your federal tax bracket, nobody remembers this, was 70%. So when people talk about taxes being too high, I'm like, well, which do you prefer, today or back in the 80s? They're probably going to go somewhere between maybe this low and that high, but we are not collecting, the country is not collecting enough tax to pay for all of the expenses, especially now that COVID is in the equation.
All right, next question for you, Pat. We are 80 and 78 years old. In 2003, we took out a LTC policy with GE, now Genworth. It's a use it or lose it policy. Would it be to our advantage to look at a new policy?
That's a great question. At 80 years old, there are fewer solutions available. There are some annuity-based solutions out there. I would say, though, my guess would be that your best bet will be keeping what you have. But that being said, we can absolutely take a look at it. So if you want to send a copy of that statement over to Daniel or over to John, and they can get it over to me, I'd be more than happy to take a peek and just at least assess what your other options may be, and then help you figure out, without my guesswork, whether or not it actually may make sense. But my instinct tells me, unless your premiums have been raised significantly, based on what's available for age 80 and 78 today, you're more than likely going to be best served by keeping what you have, if I had to guess.
Yeah, we started doing long-term care back in the mid-'80s. Some of the companies that came out, and Genworth was one of them, came out in a very big way. They wanted all of that business, and they got it. And they wrote the policies in that fashion. Then they woke up, and the actuaries kind of did pen to paper and said, okay, this was just too good. We can't keep going like this. We've got to have a different way of offering long-term. We're still going to be in the business, but we can't price it the way we priced it. And by the way, one of those issues was that you won't see an increase, okay? Or it was a long time before you saw an increase. Now you're seeing them more frequently, and it's because the actuaries are paying attention to, well, we've got a lot of costs that we have to put in this equation, and how are we going to make sure that we're not upside so that we can continue paying the benefits that we promised to the other policyholders.
Excellent. Last question, then we'll cut it off for the interest of time. For an LTC policy, when do the benefits pay out? And could you also go over what elimination period is?
Great question. So the benefits will pay out really for any of these types of policies for the same situation. It is the inability to perform 2 of 6 activities of daily living. These include basic things like being continent, being able to dress yourself, get up and move around, bathe yourself. If you can't do 2 of 6, it's an automatic qualifier. The other way you can qualify is an automatic if there's a severe cognitive impairment. So the Alzheimer's, the dementia, the Parkinson's, a traumatic brain injury from a car accident, even if physically the person is still able-bodied, those will be an automatic qualifier as well. And realistically, what it requires is your personal physician making a statement that you cannot perform 2 of 6. Most carriers don't have any additional requirements or their own testing. Some require recertification every couple years, but by and large, once that piece of paper is signed, you're generally in the clear. And most people also do not come off with long-term care claim. The other part of the question about the elimination period. The elimination period basically covers the amount of time that the consumer has to pay themselves before the company takes over. So in other words, you have a 90-day elimination period, you become disabled, you make that LTC claim, they're going to say, okay, great, get your care in place, but the first 90 days is on you. After that, we'll take over and pay for it. I would say in a general sense that the way the product works, the value in it and the price is a more important detail in the elimination period, considering it is 3 months of care, and that could run you, $25,000 potentially, but in the grand scheme relative to the benefits provided, usually the difference between a 30, a 60, or 90-day elimination period is not enough to sway the decision on which product to purchase. But that being said, we've got everything between 0 and 180 days out there. So if that is something that is important to a consumer, we can absolutely get them in a product with a 0-day elimination period if that's so desired.
And let me piggyback that with that elimination period, no matter the company, where we've had clients who, one or both needed long-term care, that did not become a problem. In other words, if it was 90-day, pretty much the check, it might have been the 90th day, but it wasn't the 120th day. All right. So when the tests are taken and the questions are asked, it may be a little onerous on you to provide the answers, and certainly maybe not much fun. But what I'm trying to say is that the money does show up pretty darn. We have not seen a problem on that. Okay. One thing we have seen a problem with, and that is with people who do not include a cost of living rider on their policies. All right. We have one couple where, they took this out like in, I don't know, 1979 or something, with a benefit of $3,000 for either one of them. 1979, $3,000 looked great. Today, not so much. And and understand too that you kind of get a price break if you hire the people to work in your home for more hours. And if it is the case, it's not like it's $10 an hour. It's $10 an hour for these many hours. It's $15 an hour for these many hours. So we've seen situations where we were trying to dial back the number of hours that were needed, but it didn't drive down up to a large extent as we thought the prices that they were paying for the help. So that's one of the ways that the companies kind of take care of their workers, to say, well, you want me here at 10 hours a day, that's one price, but 24 hours is actually cheaper on an hourly basis.
Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. And let's see what we have for next week.
Yeah, please continue asking your questions, because you really drive who we work with to bring up topics that we think are beneficial. And again, we love your questions. So we'll be looking at some people hate annuities, some people love annuities. We don't hate anything and we don't love anything. We try to tailor it to what is going to work for you. But we'll be looking at annuities, and one of the beautiful things about annuities is that it's lifetime income, kind of like Social Security. All right, Social Security isn't enough, but everybody cashes the check to the dime. So we want to make sure that you look at how do we get some foundation in the equation where you can look at having some income that would come to you no matter what the market does for the rest of your life or both of your lives. So we'll be looking at that. And let me, before I forget, say thank you so much, Patrick, for filling in the blanks on long-term care. And Patrick is available, as he says, and he has been very good at helping us evaluate what people have versus what they might have or what they're looking at, because we don't care who the carrier is. We care if the coverage is right for you. And then we'll be looking at something else that has been in the news, and I think this will continue. How do reverse mortgages work? A lot of people are, no, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. Well, we like for you to be a little bit open. We try to be open. We're going to encourage you to be open. We want to be agile, more like a palm tree in Hawaii in the winds, so we don't break, we bend. But we want to look at reverse mortgages with you to see how they work. and how that might be a good option as compared to more debt or refinancing. And let's understand that we're looking at applications of money. In other words, in a lot of cases, people have a whole lot of money sitting in the house that they're going to just leave there. They're never going to use it again. We think it makes sense to use that money while you can enjoy it, as opposed to leave it for the next generation. So that's what we have coming up, and then we may have a surprise or two in terms of where we go with this webinar thing. But if we would say that if you didn't like what happened, like particularly the 35% drop in 30 days from February 19th through March 23rd, you're probably not prepared for the next 20 years. And this question didn't come up this time, but if you ask me how bad do I think it might get, I can't see the future either. But we look at it from a standpoint of what do we think might happen. And I'm saying on national news programs for investors to be prepared for a retest of that 30% drop, 35% drop, and maybe it might be more severe this next time, maybe 40%. We just have a lot of a decline. We just have a lot of clouds on the horizon. So can't predict the future, but we don't have to predict the future for you to be prepared for the future, whether it's the good, the bad, or the unforeseen. So join us if you can next week. Love to have you. Please spread the word. And as I say, for those of you who either are frontline workers or know of frontline workers, let folks know we're happy to do a plan for them at no charge. We'll spend up to 90 minutes and help them see what their story looks like so they can feel like they're making some progress and they can get to the other side. In the meantime, folks, please mask up, please separate. Let's live through this thing as opposed to just watch increasing numbers of our loved ones and people we don't even know just die unnecessarily. So mask up, America. See you next week.